Welcome to Cherry Street Investor Education with Kavitha Baratakke, passive income coach and founder of Cherry Street Investments. Education that is designed for you to take control of your financial life. Join us to learn how you can create multiple passive income streams, diversify your portfolio, save on your taxes, and much more. Become a better investor and fast track your financial goals. Here's your host, Kavitha Baratakke.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on retiring yourself with short-term rentals. I'm excited to host one of the smartest folks I know, and I don't mean this lightly.
He doesn't know many people.
I know a lot of people. I have a huge network of people. So anyway, what I found fascinating about what Sandeep did was that he just focused on a very niche asset, right? Like short-term rentals, and he just retired himself with short-term rentals. He didn't do all these 100 other things, right? Create multiple passive income sources. He didn't do any of that. He just focused on one, did it really, really well. And what I also was really fascinated by when I met him the first time is that he had really worked out a process to manage this so beautifully without involving himself in the process. And that's really what we should all be looking towards when we want to create passive income, right? How it can become truly passive. And what I find in a lot of ways is, even including me starting my own businesses, that it's not very passive, right? You're just putting your time and your effort, and it becomes a headache. And the minute it becomes a headache, it stops being passive, right? So I'm excited to talk about this topic because I feel like this is something we should take away, not just for short-term rentals, but to do anything to figure out how to systematize and put a process around whatever you do so that you don't become the bottleneck and you're not spending your time being, hand-holding this investment that you created. So we are going to talk specifically about short-term rentals and what Sandeep's going to cover today. And by the way, I just want to point out that he said he was I told him, is it owner and operator SmokyStays? SmokyStays because all his rentals are right now in the Smoky Mountains. And he said, no, I just own, I don't operate. And I love that answer because that's really what we should be aiming for, is not becoming the operator, not getting into the daily nitty-gritties of the investment and just having it work for you, right? Truly passive. So Sandeep's going to talk about why STRs are so viable from a cash flow perspective, how to determine if the property you have right now makes a good STR. And this is of particular interest. Maybe you have a long-term rental right now that is not doing so hot because the expenses are going up and the rents are not going up. How can you make that, how can you determine if that is viable for an STR? Where you should invest in an STR, and how do you zero in on a good location, right? Because there is a lot of science and data that goes into it. It's not just like, hey, you know what? Just let's buy an STR and figure it out. No, Sandeep does a lot of data analysis, and he finds the data in to figure out what the hotspots are where you want to invest into an STR, and also how you can effectively self-manage an STR. So if you ever try to hire a management company for an STR, they'll take away 25% of whatever they make generally. So you're not really going to make clear as much if you actually hand it off to a management company. So it's in your best interest to figure out how you can effectively self-manage it. So he will Sandeep will share some of the strategies for self-management that will minimize your term commitment and maximize your cash flow. So generally, I have seen these webinars, or rather these events that people put out, run for, I don't know, $500, $100,000 or whatever. So, but Sandeep is here free to share his strategies with us. So thank you, Sandeep, again. Sorry for the long intro. I just wanted to make sure I cover everything we're going to talk about today, and I appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. Before I hand it off to Sandeep, and I'm going to say Sanjay, I wanted to just put this together. Again, anything you learn here is educational purposes only. Please always consult your own legal, financial advisor, CPA, before you make any investment decisions. We are not responsible for your investments, just educational, housekeeping. Everyone's on mute, so if you want to say something, please use the chat box to specify that. And also, if you have any questions, we please ask you to put that in the Q&A box. Webinar is always recorded and link will be sent out to all the attendees on YouTube. Please avoid it from going to spam or promotions. Please add my email to your contact list. I get this all the time and I have to answer a lot of emails, so I'm trying to minimize that now. Just a quick update, a quick overview of what we do, what I do specifically. I help people in Cherry Street invest passively as well as actively in real estate, which means they either invest into apartment buildings and larger commercial properties, and also I am a broker. I'm a realtor, so I help them find active investments in real estate. I also do what's called infinite banking, where people use life insurance policies to actually invest into real estate and other investments. Most importantly, what I focus on is a lot of education. So anyway, that was that. I do a lot of these webinars every 2 weeks. If it's the first time you're joining us, thank you for being here. If it's something you've been here often, I see a lot of familiar faces. Thank you again for being here and supporting these events. And all of that information that you learn here today will be available for you for your consumption on YouTube. So like I mentioned, it's all on YouTube. You can go subscribe here. You'll be auto-notified on new uploads of content. The short link for bit.ly for YouTube is bit.ly Terry-Street. Upcoming webinars, I have a few others I couldn't go back and look at. I was running short on time here when I put this together, so I apologize. We have a webinar on investing in ATMs with Dave Zook, who's one of the biggest investors in ATM in the country. So he's coming 2 weeks from now, June 10th. Please mark your calendars. I know that we're talking in the age of cryptocurrencies, why I'm going back to ATM, because it remains a really solid investment with great cash flow and a lot of tax benefits, which is why I keep going back to it. I'm setting up an ATM fund soon. So anyway, this will just be an educational webinar. Also, for those of you, some of you here actually bring in foreign investors into your deal, or some of you here might have relatives who want to invest into US real estate and other alternative investments. We do have a webinar on that with MW Law. They'll be talking about how to structure the entities, how foreign investors can invest in the US. So if there are any other topic suggestions, I would love to hear from you. Every 2 Thursdays of the month, every other Thursday, there is a lot of different topics that we cover here. If you're also interested, I have a Facebook investor group that I run called Purely Passive. My focus is passive, how to have people build passive income. So that's why Purely Passive. A lot of you people know me. I'm not going to spend much time. I transitioned from technology to real estate and investing about 2 years ago, and I started Cherry Street Investments. Today, the star of the show, Sandeep. So Sandeep, I already gave you a little intro about him. He's been operating Airbnb since 2012, and he started with his Airbnbs in Austin. So I think all of his properties were in downtown Austin. Is that right?
They're all actually in one building, and I'm going to go into great detail in that. And so I'm actually replicating some of this information here, but that's fine.
Okay. So yeah, if you want to skip your intro, that's fine. If you want to speak through this, that's also fine. So I met him when he had his properties in Austin, and he was looking to 1031 his properties, sell his properties and 1031 it into 53 bedrooms in Smoky Mountains. That's where he ended up. He has a background in marketing, as well as he was responsible for pricing hotel rooms, which I assume is coming very handy in the Airbnb business.
Yeah.
So anyway, he owns an MBA from Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern, and Kellogg is, oh my God, it's one of the best schools, and a BA in economics from Yale. Okay, so Ivy League after Ivy League.
Awesome. All right. Okay, here we go.
Do you want to speak through the slides, or do you want to share your own? I'm okay with
I'll share mine. It's fine.
Awesome. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to hand it off to Sandeep.
All right. Let's see. Okay. So a very creative title, just short-term rentals. This is actually the building where I own some condos, and I'm going to go into some detail on that. But it's called the Railyard. It's a tenth of a mile from the center of downtown Austin. It's across the street from the Austin Convention Center. So just to go over my background, sorry, briefly again, I went to Yale and Kellogg from education. I worked in the casino hotel business, which, you know, was very useful in kind of uncovering this opportunity because I spent time, you know, on marketing and revenue management, yield management, which is actually pricing. So before we get started, I just wanted to talk about why there's an opportunity in short-term rentals, right? And the reason is that you can buy properties that are really priced as residential assets or, you know, investment properties for rental income and transform them into essentially lodging properties, right? Short-term rentals. And that's really the source of the reason that there's higher returns for short-term rentals. And it's likely to be present for quite a while because, you know, in a purely well-functioning market where there weren't artificial constraints around how you can get financing, the prices would rise to reflect the income that you could get from them. But that's not the case, right? The financing, when you go for financing, they don't look at, they didn't used to look at, I should correct myself, they didn't used to look at Airbnb rental income. They would only look at, you know, do you have a lease agreement and what's your DTI and all that stuff. And, you know, underwriting would look at 12-month comps, and they didn't, prices have not risen fast enough on short-term rental properties or regular residential properties that you can turn into short-term rentals because of these two factors. And this will likely continue for quite a while. So I was telling you about the Railyard. So I actually owned a unit at the Railyard since June of 2000, and I held on to it when I moved to go to business school. I realized, you know, someday I might be worth a lot of money because it's in a very good location. As you can see, it's very centrally located. And so I held on to it for 10 years after I left, and I had to subsidize it like $5,000 a year. Then in 2011, 2012, I saw HomeAway and Airbnb and things taking off, and I realized with my hotel background that that was a perfect place to do it. Largely, actually, almost entirely, it was allowed because our HOA documents didn't have a minimum lease term. So typically, HOAs have a term in their documents saying you can only lease for a minimum of 6 months, 12 months. That building's HOA actually did not have one. And so by default, it wasn't that they were allowed, but they weren't prevented. And so by default, right, they were allowed. So one thing for the people in Texas, if you're HOA, if you own in an HOA and the HOA does not have a minimum lease term and you want to do short-term rentals and they have a prohibition against commercial activity and they cite that to prevent you from doing short-term rentals, that is actually against well-settled Texas law. Supreme Court of Texas has ruled that short-term rentals are a residential use, so HOAs cannot use the prohibition on commercial activity to prevent you from doing short-term rentals. The same may be true in other states. I just don't know. In any case, I had again owned a 2-2 there since June of 2000, and I saw Airbnb and HomeAway and stuff taking off, and so I hired some managers to operate it for me for a year, and then gross rents went from $18K or $1,500 a month for long-term rents to $38K. And after a year, I mean, I wasn't really paying much attention, to be honest, because I was working full-time and they were sending me checks for more than $1,500 a month, which was, you know, great. So this next part's going to sound kind of crazy, and I don't recommend doing it. But after a year went by, I kind of looked at what they were doing, and I realized they were just getting a 42% occupancy rate, which was just horrible for downtown Austin. And I realized that if I bought that place for cash at that point, I would get a 10% cash on cash return, pure, no leverage, right? You leverage it 4-to-1 and it becomes, close to 50%. So actually, I couldn't believe it. You don't see gold just lying on the ground. There's a joke, an economics professor and a PhD student are walking down the street, and the PhD student says, "Hey, look, there's a $100 bill," and he runs and gets it, and this professor just keeps walking by, and he gets the money and he catches up to him. He says, "Professor, why didn't you look? There's a $100 bill on the ground." And the professor says, "Don't be silly. If there's a $100 bill on the ground, somebody would have already picked it up." And so, I couldn't believe that these returns were available, but I was actually able to get hotel occupancy tax receipt data from the state of Texas. So if you operate a short-term rental in Texas, you have to file hotel occupancy taxes, and that is publicly available information. So I knew my numbers on my unit. There was another 4-bedroom unit in that same complex. I got those numbers, and I got the numbers from a bunch of places downtown, and I saw, yeah, this is a real opportunity. So I kept talking about it to my wife for a month, like, "Hey, did you know if I bought this place for cash today, I'd get a 10% cash on cash return. If I leverage it, I'll get this." And she finally said, "You know what? Either do something or stop talking about it." And I quit my job, liquidated my retirement savings, flew to Austin, and put 16 units under contract for $6 million, which I didn't have. And then I tried to raise the money. So needless to say, this is not the right order to do things, but I was so convinced of the opportunity, and the numbers I had were rock solid. The only way you couldn't believe my numbers is if you thought people paid more in occupancy tax than they had to. If you believe the occupancy tax numbers from the state of Texas, you could see that these ridiculous returns were available. But I wasn't able to raise the money. I had to terminate all my contracts. In the state of Texas, you can put $6 million worth of property under contract for $6,000 in option fees. So I lost that. I replaced the retirement funds and saved my marriage. 3 of the owners allowed me to sign 12-month leases. They gave me a 1-year option to buy the places at the prices that we'd negotiated then. So here's a pro tip. Don't give anyone a free option, much less for a year. For some reason, they did. So I just tested it out. I was living in Las Vegas at the time. I tested it out for 8 months, worked beautifully. So the 3 places that I was renting and my 4th that I owned, and I, kind of moved to Austin and just started doing this full time. So just to share the results quickly, I didn't do this math or stretch it back to 2000. I don't know what it would look like. The internal rate of return would obviously be much lower. But I had to, all these numbers are as if I bought the places, at the end of 2012, 2013. So I bought 4 places, one of which I own, but I bought 4 for 1.2. I had to put $280,000 down. Oh, here's the other interesting thing. I was able to raise the down payment just from the rental income, just from the Airbnb rental income from the 4 condos that I was managing at that point. So the one that I owned and the 3 that I leased, I was able to come up with all the money for the down payment and then some. But I didn't have a job, so I couldn't get loans. And luckily, I handed it to my father. He thought this was a crazy idea. He didn't think it would work, but he co-signed for me. In retrospect, I probably could have done this whole thing while keeping my job. It wasn't that difficult and, qualified anyway, but luckily it worked out. So I cash flowed the places about $1 million over 6 years. I ended up buying another one in 2018. So the reason that I was really interested in this opportunity first was just because of the cash flows. I knew it would cash flow amazingly well. And I knew there was a ridiculously high terminal value because it was a 3-story building across the street from the convention center and 1/10 of a mile from the center of downtown. And it was 92,000 square feet, and you can build 1.8 million square feet there. So I knew that land was just a complete, waste of space. It was not by any stretch the highest and best use. So in early 2018, we actually got a offer to buy the building for, I think it was $72 million. It was something around $800 or $900 a square foot. And I just happened to stumble upon somebody who wanted to sell their property. They knew about the offer. But anyway, I was able to buy another one in 2018 after I was pretty sure that we were going to sell it to these private equity investors. And so that's what happened in 2019. So basically 6 years after I started, I sold the properties that I'd bought for purchase price of 5.5. And so it turned into a gain of $4 million and 67% internal rate of return and 12.7 equity multiple. So
I have two questions here. One is the cash flow numbers your net, like after all expenses?
that's pure cash. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And two.
And the 76, actually, it should be 76 plus 280. Like I didn't. Yeah. So
actually got that cash flow from the rentals.
Yeah.
And two, the 2019 numbers for cash flow seem to have dipped. Is that why you sold, or was that dip because it's mid?
No. So what happened? Well, so we sold at the end of, so a couple things. I cannot claim credit for the timing of the sale. The timing of the sale was these private equity investors came into Austin and were scooping up all sorts of properties downtown. So I did want to sell, and I would have sold. I did vote to sell, and I'll tell you in a second what else happened. But there was extreme price competition that broke out. Everybody started figuring this out. And even with my expertise and everything else, I just could not maintain revenues. This is also 2 months. We sold at the end of October, so this doesn't include November and December revenues, but still, that's part of the reason I was happy to get out. The Austin City Council also announced they were going to expand the convention center, and their plans included the 2 plots of land where the Railyard sat. So it was, in retrospect, it was kind of risky. So, here's one, I think, interesting story, which, you should always think about when you're making decisions. The buyers came to us and were scheduled to close at the end of October 2019. And they weren't going to be able to tear the building down or get ready or anything like that for a few years. So they asked us if they could extend the sale till the end of April. And there's an event in Austin that people in Austin know about, South by Southwest, and probably most people know about it. But we made a lot of money during that period of time. And they offered us a $5 million non-refundable deposit. They offered us a couple million more, I think, to purchase. And everyone was like, oh, yes, we should definitely do this. And me and another guy between us own 20% of the voting rights, and it takes 80% to approve something. So if you have 20%, you can block it. And we both said, no, we should take this money now. We are not waiting. And, and then look what happened. I mean, if we had not sold, they would have walked away from the $5 million. In fact, the block where the W was under contract for $240 with a $15 million non-refundable deposit, and those buyers blocked. They didn't close. So did you have any other questions, Kavitha?
No. Okay. That's great. I mean, what timing, right?
Oh yeah. Well, so then I had. So let me just quickly go through. I'll come back to your point about timing. So this is a map of Austin, and it's from a website called AirDNA, and it's .co, not .com. What AirDNA does is they scrape the Airbnb website every single day, and then they compare day to day, and they say, okay, well, this property got booked between yesterday and today, and it was priced at this yesterday. So we're estimating that this much, this is how much that property made in revenue. And they kind of triangulate the positions of all these properties. So all this is just a list, or it's not a list, it's a map of all the short-term rentals in Austin that were on AirDNA at this point in time. This is a couple years old, but you can see they're highly clustered in the right around downtown. So one important aspect of short-term rentability for property is, where is it located? That's a very key element. So you can see up in the upper left, there's a lot of properties. There's like quite a concentration of properties up by the lake, because that's like a destination where people would like to rent. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to boil this down to the top 10 properties. So you can see they're all clustered around mostly downtown Austin. There are a couple up by the lake properties in the upper left. I don't know what this one little dot is here. Oh, it's on the Colorado River. I guess maybe that's why. But let me talk a little bit about location in terms of what your what the attendees might be interested in doing. So the first thing is, I would say that this slide and these slides that are presented are, if you're going to buy a new property with the sole purpose of doing short-term rentals, then you want to probably focus a lot on location. And the second thing that's important is regulation. So you can't just, in many cities, there's been a big backlash against Airbnb. It's happened in Austin, it's happened in San Francisco, New York, pretty much everywhere. So I wouldn't necessarily, I would definitely research any sort of regulations around short-term rentals to make sure that you can do it, because I can't tell you how many horror stories I've heard from people that said, oh, we thought we could do it and now we can't, it's not going to cash flow, we're going to lose money. That is a very important consideration. Now, having said that, my parents live in Garland, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas. And when we go and visit them, we stay in this house where, importantly, there's no HOA, right? You have to watch out for HOAs. We stay in this HOA, or we stay in this house that just looks like a normal house from the outside, but you walk in and it's the most beautifully decorated place I've ever stayed. And we probably pay like, $200-300 a night to stay there. And I can't imagine that person is not cash flowing a few $1,000s a month on average, because, people do go to Garland and families do need places to stay. So there is a balance. I don't necessarily know that I would buy that from, I don't necessarily know that I would buy a property from the beginning with the intent to do that. But if you're sitting on a property that is not cash flowing, as Kavitha said earlier, then this is something that you should research by looking on Airbnb, seeing how many properties are near you, seeing how occupied they are, what do they seem to be charging. And you can rent furniture, try it for a few months and see how it works. So, in the right locations, STR revenues far surpass long-term revenues. And what it allowed me to do was to buy for high appreciation and cash flow, because those places in Austin where I bought, as I said, the first 10 years I had to subsidize it by about $5,000 a year. So now I had a very good problem, which was, well, what do I do with all this money? I had to buy $5.5 million worth of property, and in order not to pay taxes, so to do the 1031. So I bought the entire raw US data set from AirDNA, which you don't have to do that. That's extremely expensive. I did it just because I didn't want to make a mistake, and I was investing a lot of money. So I bought that data from AirDNA. They have a product called Investment Explorer, like Investment Explorer, and also one called Market Minder. So if you look at those two, if you go to their website, airdna.co, and you look at those, they're kind of dashboards. So you can, I think for very low cost, like maybe Austin's $100 a month, you can get a lot of useful data, or for whatever area you live in or thinking about investing in, you can get that data, or you can get a lot of useful data for not a lot of money. But I bought the raw data from AirDNA. I crossed it with cost data from Zillow, and I came up with the top 100 zip codes where, you know, the highest return per dollar investment, and basically the best market in the United States at that time, and probably still, was the Smoky Mountains. And here's another kind of funny story that I tell. So this was, you know, I knew the sale was happening. So this was probably around August, September of 2019, a month or two before the sale. And I determined that I was going to put all my money into the Smoky Mountains. And there were a couple of different factors. Let me see, actually, if I, yeah, here. So a couple of different things that I looked at. I mentioned regulatory stability. You don't want to buy in an area. Again, this is separate from if you already own. If you already own, I mean, you didn't hear it from me, but you can try it and ask for permission later. But if you're going to buy, you want to buy in a market that's regulatorily stable, because you don't want to buy in a market and then find out later that you can't do it or that the city council hates it. Like Nashville. Nashville was an awesome market if you got in early. There were people that have bought there and they got grandfathered in against regulations that the city council has passed. And I've looked very hard at that market, but the city council is just insane. And so you just want to be very, very careful of regulation. Another thing that,
Hey, Sandeep, one quick question there. Sometimes when you look in, let's say, for example, in Austin city limits, there is a lot of regulations around short-term rental and you have to apply for a permit. But when you go right outside Austin, let's say you go to Pflugerville or Round Rock, you might not have the same permissions required. Is that true generally, let's say with Nashville as well? Or is that true of most cities rather?
So it is true of most cities for the reason that, so what happened I'll tell you what happened in Austin and Nashville that caused this. And I can't blame people. So in East Austin, which is right across the street, right across the highway from downtown, so it's very close to downtown, and in Nashville, what people did was they bought single-family homes in the middle of residential neighborhoods just because they were close to downtown. And then there was a guy in Austin who was buying 2- and 3-bedroom houses and packing 20 people in there. And every weekend there'd be a bachelor party. And, you know, if I lived next to a house like that, I wouldn't like it. Luckily, my building was a condo building. So first of all, no owners lived there. It was only renters. And the city council doesn't care about renters. And the second thing was, they're like, well, you didn't buy in a single family neighborhood. You bought in a condo in the center of downtown Austin. Like, what did you expect? So, you know, for single family homes, especially, what you said is true. The main kind of area around downtowns and the urban cores like Austin and Nashville, they regulate the heck out of it. They don't necessarily regulate it in the surrounding areas, but that's because people aren't buying 3-bedroom houses and putting 20 people bachelor parties in there. It's more families and things that come. So it's still kind of under the radar. Now, your neighbors might not like it, but if you're not in an HOA, there's probably not a lot the city is going to do to stop you. Now, one tip I will give people is if you're already doing this or you plan to do it, I would find out what taxes you're legally required to pay and pay them and document it. And the reason I say that is because what happened in Austin and Nashville is when they passed the regulations, if you could prove that you were in operation and paying your taxes and abiding by whatever laws and rules there were, you got grandfathered in against any regulation. And then your licenses, and when they gave those licenses to people, in one sense, they're not really that, it doesn't really make that much of a difference because they don't really enforce it as well as they might, especially in Austin. They do in Nashville. But okay, so here's another kind of thing to watch out for. in San Francisco, New York, Chicago, what's happened is Airbnb has become the choke point, because if you don't have a license, Airbnb won't let you list. So if you have a license and Airbnb knocks out your competition, that is very valuable. And that's why you want to look for situations where you can get grandfathered in. In Austin and Nashville, they haven't done that yet. And so, you know, even if you have a license, it's not as great as some of these other cities where you literally cannot operate without a license because you cannot get onto Airbnb.
Gotcha. I have another question. Sorry, I'm asking a lot of questions
No,
here.
no, of course.
So one of the things, so recently one of my investors is buying a condo, and I see that the condo obviously would be perfect for a short-term rental, but the HOA says, oh, you can do 40% of the units in the condo can be on long-term rentals, but no short-term rentals. Is that something the HOA can actually impose? I know you said earlier something about it's not legal.
If it's in the so what they can't do is they can't say that whatever rental activity you want to do is prohibited, because in Texas they can't say whatever rental activity you want to do is prohibited because it's a commercial activity. Now, if they want to say that, you know, only 20% of the units can be long-term rentals and owners have to occupy the rest, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know for sure, but from my layman's opinion, yes, they can totally do that.
Yeah, no. 40% of the units have to be long-term rentals. The question is, could I take that 40% where I have a permit to do a long-term rental, but really run a short-term rental? Do you see what I'm asking?
Are you asking from the legal city perspective, or are you asking from the HOA perspective?
Both, I guess. So let's say I have the 40% rentals that I'm in the permit pool, renting pool of long-term rentals. Can I now short-term rental against the HOA's mandate that there are no short-term rentals? Because I've seen a lot of HOA companies say no short-term rentals. Is that legally enforceable?
So yes, because, and the way and the reason that it's enforced is they have minimum lease terms. So when you buy into the HOA, you agree, I'm not gonna, if I rent my place, first of all, you might not be able to rent your place, right? This place that you're talking about only has 40%. But even if you can, you've agreed to a minimum lease term in the condominium documents.
Gotcha.
The only thing I'm specifically talking about in terms of HOAs prohibiting things in Texas is if they don't have a minimum lease term, and the sole reason they're saying you can't do it is because it's a commercial activity. Short-term rental use in Texas, as determined by the Supreme Court of Texas, is not a commercial activity. It's a residential activity. They say the use of the property is the same. People are just living in it. It's just the duration that changes. And so, you know, the duration does not change into commercial activity. That's more for stuff like running a hairdressing or, you know, an auto shop or things like that.
Perfect. I think that answered my question. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Sure. So the other thing I was kind of looking for was a place where there's a lot of infrastructure. So if you look at the Smoky Mountains, has been a vacation rental market for forever. I mean, 50 years. Like, people have been coming here. I've had people come to me and say, you know, I've been coming here for 40 years. I came here as a kid. I came here with my I came here as a kid, I came here with my kids, and I'm coming back, you know, with my grandkids. And because of that, there's like a huge kind of ecosystem of cleaners, maintenance people are familiar with it. Another stat I looked at was, okay, what's the yearly visitation? And the Smokies visitation has been growing, you know, 3% a year for a long time. And one thing you want to watch out for if you're looking at short-term rentals for the last year, there are a lot of places where you're going to see a short-term pop, and it might not necessarily continue after COVID is completely over. So you want to watch out for that, because you don't know if it's going to, you know, keep going like that or not. So you should look at more revenues pre-COVID and kind of figure out, well, am I really buying something that's a temporary pop, or is this really going to continue? So the other thing I looked at, and I would encourage everyone to look at, is what is the percent of population within driving distance? And it turned out that for the Smokies, 60% of the U.S. population is within a day's drive. And so the funny story I was going to tell is that I told everybody I'd been talking to and my friends that, look, I'm going to put all of my money into the Smoky Mountains. And they said, well, that's not a good idea. You need to diversify. You need to put some in beach towns in Florida. You need to put some in urban areas like Nashville or Austin or wherever you can. Buy some ski condos out west and then put some in the Smoky Mountains. And I said, no, absolutely not. The Smoky Mountains is such a great market that the only thing that could mess it up would be something that messes up the entire country. The only thing that could mess up the entire country is a recession. And I'm fully prepared for a recession. And then the pandemic broke out. So just goes to show you, anything can happen.
But I think the fact that you were during the pandemic, people could actually still drive there and have a vacation was probably a big plus, right?
So again, this was, I made a good decision to buy in the Smokies, but the timing of it worked out unbelievably well because Austin basically died as a short-term rental market for a year. I mean, it's just started to come back. And the Smokies for the first so I bought them in December 19, January 20. The booking window is pretty far out. All my places are 5+ bedrooms. It's 5 to 10 bedrooms. So the booking window is not like, people pop in for a weekend. It's 3 to 6 months out. I just started getting reservations. And then the pandemic hit and I basically didn't have any reservations for 3 months. And then after that, ever since June, it's been nonstop. And the prices have risen here by probably 50 to 60% in the year that I've owned. So I got very, very lucky.
I think it's also luck and research. I'd say it's not luck.
No, I made my own luck, I guess. Like I picked the best spot and then, COVID could have gone a different way and it didn't. And so I guess you're right. I probably don't take enough credit for picking the right market, which
is critical in real estate, right?
Yeah,
Location,
no, it's definitely
location. So
yeah, you can yes, picking the right market is definitely helpful.
But generally, don't put your job like he did. A word of advice.
Well, yeah, I mean, in retrospect, I shouldn't have done that. Mostly because if my dad hadn't co-signed, I would have been dead in the water, right? I mean, I just would have been completely dead. But yeah, I don't recommend doing that at all.
Yeah, most loans, they want you to have a job, but W-2 is a great thing for getting home loans. So well, that's another topic we'll be talking about, residential home loans and home loans for folks who don't necessarily are self-employed. W-2, it's pretty easy, but the self-employed folks, how they can get loans or different kinds of loans. That's on my webinar list. Sorry, go ahead.
No problem. So here's some other markets that came up in my research. So Gulf Shores, Alabama, the Blue Ridge Mountains in Georgia, in Florida, the Destin and Panama City beach markets, and then there's kind of those are real touristy, but there's a kind of an upscale area like those called 30A. And really, it's funny because at the end of the day, all I had to do was read the published list by these companies like AirDNA, Vacasa, and Evolve, and I would have seen Pigeon Forge, Sevierville, and Gatlinburg, which are the 3 Smoky Mountain towns, pop up on the list again and again and again in the top one. So I really didn't have to do the vast amount of research that I did. I mean, I don't regret doing it because it gave me a lot of certainty. But here are some of the markets that I've found, and again, all these companies publish lists every year of where they say are where they think the good markets are, and they have a ton of data. So AirDNA, as I said, has all the Airbnb data that they scrape all the time. Vacasa and Evolve are 2 of the largest property managers in the country, so you can put a lot of faith in the lists that they publish. So I wanted to talk. So let me take a little bit of a step back, and Kavitha asked me if I was an owner operator, and I said no. I really just kind of own. And people ask me, do you do this full time? And my answer is, well, I don't do anything else, but this isn't a full-time job either. And so let me give you, some of the background on that. So I've talked about location. I highly recommend managing yourself. I was able to take the revenues from the manager that was before me from 38K to 60K. The second year I did it, I actually took the revenues to 80K. Now, everyone may or may not be able to do that, but you can definitely outperform, a bad manager. When you're doing short-term rentals, you want to have as much distribution as possible. So list on Airbnb, list on VRBO. They don't, HomeAway is gone now actually, so it's just Vrbo now. TA is TripAdvisor. When you're starting out, hire the best cleaners and pay them well, because that will lead to good reviews, and getting good reviews in the beginning is critical. I don't actually have this as one of my top 10 tips. It should be. But what I was going to speak a little bit about, you can use software to automate a lot of these things. So one of the difficult, software, so AirDNA is not really a software per se. It's a website where you can get, data on short-term rentals. One of the difficult things about operating short-term rentals when you're on different channels, like what I said in number 3, is you have to block the calendars for each different site where you're listed, because if you don't, multiple people can book the same dates. So there is software called channel managers, and what these channel managers do is they're connected to all the different sites, and as soon as a person makes a reservation, it automatically blocks all the other sites out. You can use these channel managers to automatically respond to guest inquiries. So if somebody asks, you get tons of inquiries saying, are these dates available? And the reason is because people don't have channel managers, and so the dates aren't actually available, they just haven't blocked them. But for me, my dates are always available. If you can make an inquiry on it, those dates are available. So I have software that if somebody asks, if it has the words available or availability in it, it just responds, these dates are available. And you can set up these channel managers to have, as soon as a booking is made, it sends a message to the person. It sends a message the day before check-in with the instructions. It sends a message the morning after they check in to see if they need anything. It sends the checkout instructions. It sends a post-stay email asking how everything went. And I should say that I've automated a lot of these things with software, but I also use a virtual assistant. So you can find virtual assistants that are well-versed in short-term rentals. Like when I started, I had to train one from scratch, but now you can go on Upwork or Elance or any of these sort of virtual assistant sites, and you can find people that have a lot of experience in managing, short-term rentals for owners, basically. And so my virtual assistant, does things like she goes in and changes the last 2 pictures on Airbnb every day, because that's somehow in the pricing algorithm. She changes the titles slightly every day because that gives you a pop in the algorithm. She answers the questions that are non-standard. So if I get a message saying anything about Wi-Fi, it responds with, and it's not a guest, it responds with the Wi-Fi speed. If it is a guest, it tells them the Wi-Fi username and password, because even though it's in my instructions, people don't read them. And I'll give you the names of some channel managers that are good. The one I use is called Beds24, so BEDS 24. There's another one called YouPorter, YOUPORTER, YouPorter. There's one called Uplisting, Uplisting. There's one, and I actually use a few different of these for different functionality. I don't only use one. There's another one called Smart BNB, and their site is smartbnb.io. A big key to success in short-term rentals is doing the pricing, and that's a lot of the reason I've been successful, is that I had a lot of background in pricing lodging properties. Now, it's a pain in the butt. What I used to do when I first started is I was across the street from the Courtyard Marriott, and my virtual assistant, I would have her go through and get the prices every day for an entire year. And then I would look at them and figure out how much I should price my places for the entire year. And now they have software that helps you do this. So the software that I use is called Price Labs, Pricelabs. And what it allows you to do is kind of set a base price, or what you think the average price should be, and then a high price and a low price. And then it automatically changes the prices up and down within that. And it shows you kind of a dashboard of how far out you're booked, 30, 60, 90 days. And if you're not booked enough, it shows in red, and you kind of lower your prices. And if you're green, you can say, well, I'm booking too fast, so I'll raise my prices. So I highly recommend using pricing software that saves me, a ton of time.
How does that compare with? I know Airbnb has its own, like, they suggest prices. Do you suggest following that, or do you suggest completely ignoring?
No, it's horrible. It's horrible. So Airbnb is really, their main goal right now is not necessarily profitability. It's expanding the short-term rental market as much as they can, because they're the leader, so they get the most share. And the strategy behind doing that is to make everybody's prices like rock bottom. I mean, it's ridiculous, the price suggestions I get from them. I would never ever use their price suggestions. If you're in a urban downtown location, you should vet your guests very carefully, so you can ask them, like, what are the ages of the people in your group, what's the reason you're visiting, things like that. You cannot make your place look nice enough, and this is 8 and 9, and then it leads into 10, which is, you really want your place to look extremely nice in terms of decor and decoration and design, and then get professional pictures. And that way you can compete on experience and how nice your property is, as opposed to on price, which you never want to do. And if you're a control freak at all, don't do this. You just don't do this. You will not sleep at night. I mean, I've had, I won't tell you all the different stories of things that have happened to me, but you don't want to do this if you're not willing to let people, come into your property and, do God knows what, because they will, and you'll find out about it later. You might find about it while it's happening, and you just, if it's going to give you heartburn, don't do this.
And as far as the vetting process, do you have your VA do that, or do you?
Yeah, so actually, it's a little bit more difficult now. In the beginning, when I was doing this, everyone would send a request to book. And so you could respond and say, well, tell me about the ages of, tell me about your ages, why are you coming? And now it's really, they put a focus on instant booking. So they allow people to book instantly. Now you can still put a list of questions that you want them to answer in their instant booking. It's not a request, but when they make an instant booking, and you can put in there, before they book, you can show them, here are my rules. Like, you have to be over, mine are, everyone in the group has to be over 25 unless it's parents traveling with children, which gets a little confusing, because you can be a 21-year-old kid, as long as your parents are coming, then that's fine with me. But it's still possible. I wouldn't just turn on instant booking and let Tom, Dick, and Harry book. So let's see. And that is my email. I know I didn't give you a lot of detail, but if you want to email me, I'm happy to answer any questions you have, or give you the names of some of the software that I use. Anything that you like.
Yeah, maybe you can share that channel manager and also the pricing email, links. I can send that along with the recording of the presentation, but I thought that was a lot of information. I don't know, but I did think there was a lot of information in there, even though there were 5 bullet points, there was just a lot of information about those bullet points. So I do appreciate that. I think we have a lot of questions. So let's get to the questions right now.
Okay.
Anonymous asks, is there any website where you can easily search and map with counties and cities that allow STRs?
This is actually a great business to start, because there is nothing like this.
That would be awesome business idea right there, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, even Airbnb doesn't bother trying to keep track. Unfortunately, there's not. You have to do the research basically yourself. Let's see. From an HOA, if I'm an Airbnb doing short, can HOAs?
Okay, I'll just read the questions so everybody knows.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Banik asks, follow up from HOA POB. If I have an Airbnb unit in an HOA doing short term, can the HOA change the CCNRs after I list it to not allow me to do short terms?
So typically they cannot. There is a mechanism in place typically where the HOA can change the CCNRs. The board can't do it just on their whim. There has to be a vote, and typically between 67 and 80% of the owners have to vote to change them. But you really have to talk to a lawyer. You have to show them that you could probably read it yourself and figure out if they can do it. If they persist in trying to do it without a vote and without following the language that's in the CCRs to change them, then you would have to talk to a lawyer. But CCRs can definitely, CC and Rs can definitely be changed. There is a process that allows for that.
So just for those of you who are not familiar with CCNRs, it's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, right?
Yep.
So yeah, that's something the HOA puts together in their documents, so that you have to follow as an owner, as a person, part of the HOA. All right, Lisa asks, I run 3 vacation rental spaces. I made the mistake of only listing on Airbnb initially, then about 6 months, I listed on VRBO as well. I noticed that I can rent for more dollars and have higher quality tenants, renters, typically more respectful adults and families. Have you noticed the same trend?
So I have, but that doesn't really mean anything because it's very market specific. So there could be some markets where Airbnb, it's the opposite. You can't really generalize that way because again, it is just location specific.
Makes sense. Tushar asks, any international markets, Puerto Rico, Caribbean, South America, that you researched?
So I think you also asked the following 2 questions. So any international markets, PR, Caribbean, South America, you researched. More importantly, how easy it is to do business there. I'm guessing that's also a follow-on question. So I didn't research any international markets specifically for my 1031 because I couldn't 1031 into any foreign markets. I know that there are a lot of short-term rentals in some of these places like Puerto Rico and the Caribbean. I just don't know what the returns are. I don't know how easy it is to do business there. Unfortunately, I just didn't really look at any international markets.
And some of the air, does that AirDNA stuff also have data on
AirDNA has actually, yeah, that's a good point. So AirDNA, if you want to research an international market, you should look at AirDNA because they cover basically the entire world now. I think they just started covering a few years ago markets outside the United States. Do I use Booking.com? Yes, I use Booking.com. I'm also on Expedia, which covers Orbitz, Travelocity, Hotels.com. I mean, I'm on basically every site you can possibly be on, and that's why the channel manager is very useful. So yeah, that's part of the reason I advise to get as much distribution as possible. You should, if you're doing this seriously, you should be on Airbnb, VRBO, Booking.com, and Expedia, and all the partner sites for Expedia.
Okay.
Ashwin is asking, would you pick condos or small homes for the best ROI for STR? My experience has been, well, I'm not sure. Let's see, would I pick condos or small homes? I think you're asking, if you're asking to pick between condos or homes, it would depend on if they're in the same location and if the HOA of condos allows them. If you're asking, is it better to buy bigger or smaller? My experience in urban cores and even in the Smoky Mountains is that the ROI goes up the larger the places are, because you can buy a 5-bedroom place for not 5 times as much money as a 1-bedroom place, but you get 5 times the revenue. So I would buy the largest place that you can afford after having done all your due diligence to make sure that what I'm saying applies in your market. But in general, the larger the place is, the higher the ROI.
So I have a question on that, Sandeep. So let's say if I take a 4-bedroom versus a 1-bedroom, I think, okay, being a lay person, that 1-bedroom would get rented more often rather than the 4-bedroom, because fewer people can afford those 4-bedroom rentals. So would that not ding me from an occupancy perspective?
It does ding you from an occupancy perspective, but what you should be looking at is there's a metric called RevPAR, which is revenue per available room night. And the RevPAR on bigger properties is higher because even though they're occupied less, on the nights that they are occupied, you get a much higher average daily rate. And if you think about who are you competing with if you have a 1-bedroom condo, right? You have a 1-bedroom condo, you're not only competing with every hotel in town, you're also competing against, there are venture funded startups that just do apartment arbitrage. So they go to luxury apartments and they say, we'll take 20 units, but we want to put them on Airbnb. And so if you have a 1-bedroom place, you're competing against every hotel in town. You're also competing against these well-funded startups. Some of Sonder, there's one called Sonder, S-O-N-D-E-R. They just went public. You don't really want to, if you're thinking about investing, if you're thinking about buying in an urban area or a downtown, I would definitely not buy a 1-bedroom with the intent of doing STR with it. If you can get a 2, 3, 4, 5, you're not competing against hotels. Well, you are, but it's a good competition because you are much more price effective against them. If you have a family of people that's coming to stay, it's a lot cheaper for them to rent your 5-bedroom house for $800 a night than to get 5 hotel rooms for $200 a night. So,
wow, that is a fresh perspective. I would have never thought about that. I think a lot of audience will feel the same way. We feel like smaller will rent more often. So
it definitely does. It definitely does. They have much higher occupancy rates, but again, there's price compression from your competition, right? Like why? Like right now in Austin, I have a friend who lived in that same building. Actually, he owned an STR in that same building that I was talking about. And the new owners actually are still operating 25% of the units as STRs until they tear it down. He's like, well, I could stay there for $80 a night, or I could stay at the Fairmont for $90 a night. Why would you stay there, right? So let's see. Are there additional factors out-of-state investors should consider? So here's the advice that I would give to people who are seriously interested in exploring this from an out-of-state perspective. There are, and I can, if you remind me, Kavitha, I'll send you an email with this and you can send it out. There are tons of Facebook groups and there are tons of YouTube channels that are devoted to the whole topic of STRs and doing them from out of state. So there's one called Short-Term Rental University. Now, a lot of these are run by gurus who have these seminars, and but they offer a lot of free content, and it's very, very good, especially for beginners. And there's a lot of YouTube channels. There are a lot of Facebook groups, and there's tons. I'm on all these groups, and there's tons and tons of discussion about things that out-of-state investors should consider. The one thing I would encourage people is don't think that you can't do it because you're from out of state. Don't think that it takes up so much time that you can't do it. I know doctors who don't have all the software that I talk about. They don't have virtual assistants. They run their cabins from their smartphone. And so the two things that you need, the two things that you absolutely need if you're out of state is you need good cleaners and you need a good handyman. And you need to, come visit every 3 months, every 6 months. But I mean, besides that, there are obviously a number of additional factors that out-of-state investors should consider. I just can't really name them all easily. But I, again, encourage everyone to, join some of these Facebook groups and watch a lot of these videos on YouTube.
And I'll get that and send that out along with the channel manager as well as the pricing websites links.
Sure. Anonymous person asked, is there such a thing as vetting too much, liable for discrimination? Yes, there is. I mean, that's a fine line, right? The answer, yes. I don't know where that line is, but definitely
Is the fair housing law still applicable? I don't
know. Honestly, I don't know, but I will tell you this: Airbnb or VRBO, if they think you're discriminating against people, will kick you off the platform. So, if you're vetting based on protected classes, then yeah, you're vetting too much.
Okay.
Let's see.
Age is a discrimination according to fair housing laws, right?
No.
Oh, no, it's not. Over, yeah, you can do 55 over, that's right.
Well, you can do 55 or over, and there's nothing discriminatory about saying you can't rent unless you're 25.
Yeah.
Right? Because car rental companies do that, some hotels do it. What you can't do is discriminate based on, well, I'm not going to talk to this. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to say anything like that. But you can research and figure out what you can and can't do. Let's see. Did I use an interior decorator? Yes. As you can see by my shirt, I have no taste at all. So I definitely used interior decorators, and they helped tremendously. I had interior decorators, and I also had professional photography done. Do I have cameras? Yes, I have. Then this is part of my vetting process. It's part of the process by which I let guests vet themselves. So I have video cameras on the outside of every property that are motion activated and record video. And I tell people that. And I say I use these cameras to monitor occupancy, to monitor my rule against pets, to monitor against my rule against parties. So if you have to let them know. It's a rule. If you have cameras and you don't let people know, and Airbnb, somebody reports to Airbnb, they'll kick you off the platform. How is Yosemite as an area for STR? I don't know. Unfortunately, I would guess that it is a good area because there's a national park there, and in general, places which have high visitation are good, but I don't know the purchase prices there. I don't know the revenues. My guess is that it's good, but I don't know. Can you own an STR out of an SDIRA? I don't think the rules for SDIRAs really care what really care what you're doing with the property you buy, whether it's an LTR, a commercial property, an STR. Kavitha, you might be able to speak more to that, but
Yeah, the only thing I can add there is I know that if you are investing, if you want to be very legal about this, if you're investing from an STIRA, you cannot go live in that property anymore, because you would be utilizing a property that belonged to an STIRA. So unless you paid yourself, I mean, even if you did pay, you cannot use it for any of you or your relatives who are considered, like, I forget the name for it. But people that are considered your relatives are not allowed to use that particular property, because that would be a violation of the IRA rules. So.
okay.
And also, you have to also place, if you want to place debt, it becomes a little bit more challenging with STIRA, right? So, but you can definitely own using an STIRA. There's no problems.
Okay. So somebody asked, how did I buy the properties in Smokies? There's no website. I mean, the properties in the Smokies are listed on the MLS. Typically, I mean, there's some that are off market, but they're just listed just like properties in any other market. Typically, they're not any special. There are websites. I should take that back. There are websites that kind of list STRs that are for sale. They're typically not very good. Like I never found any that are useful, because you don't get all the information that you need. My agent in the Smoky Mountains actually covers, she specializes in short-term rental markets, not just the Smoky Mountains. So she specializes in, she has operations in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Georgia, in Destin, Panama City Beach, 30A in Florida, in Gulf Shores, Alabama, and the Smokies. Her name is Avery Allen Carl, and she actually runs a Facebook group called Short Term Shop, which has a lot of useful content. But I highly recommend her as an agent. I'm glad you asked that question. I didn't give her credit. I bought all 8 of my cabins through her, and she's the #1 individual agent in the Smokies. She's actually #2 in Tennessee by a wide margin and 83rd in the entire United States. So I bought, to answer the question directly, I bought through an agent, Avery Allen Carl. Let's see. Can you sell a rental property through a 1031 and put the cash towards an existing investment property, or do you have to use it for something brand new? So I would urge you to talk to a 1031 specialist, but from my understanding of your question, you have to buy something brand new. It can't be something that you can't own a property, sell another one, and use the proceeds to upgrade the property that you already own. It has to be something that you acquire after the property that you sell.
Yeah, I'll verify that. That's my understanding as well. You cannot just finance an existing investment property with a 1031 exchange.
Right. Let's see. If I had $1 million to invest in a rental property, would you still pick STR over LTR in the current market, assuming the location and other deciding factors remain equally compelling for either option? If everything else is equal, STR wins over a long-term rental every time.
I think what keeps people away from STR, Sandeep, I know what's kept me away from it is the fact that it tends to feel like a lot of headache to manage, whereas an LTR feels like you put a tenant and you forget about it, right? It pretty much manages itself and you have a few occasional concerns, but STR feels like a lot of work. So what is your...
I know it feels like a lot of work. Honestly, and it is. I'm not going to say it's not as much work as an LTR, because you have constant turnover. People ask stupid questions like, "Where are the remote batteries?" or like, "There's no batteries in the remote," or whatever it happens to be. So, but what I do is I try to problem solve a lot of that stuff with the cleaners. So I have the cleaners check for that the remotes are working, that the Wi-Fi is working. I try to prevent a lot of those calls from coming in the first place. But yeah, it's not, the way I look at it is it's passive relative to the income that you're getting. For the income that you're getting, it's pretty damn passive, but it's not, completely passive. So, if I had $1 million, I would buy another cabin in the Smoky Mountains.
No, I want to say long-term rentals are not completely passive either. I manage long-term rentals. It's a pain in the butt, regardless.
What tech are your favorite devices for smart home enabling your spaces? So there's a couple of things that I use. One is I use Nest thermostats, and then I use Schlage encode locks, and they allow you to change the codes between every guest through Wi-Fi. You can also program them to only work during a certain time period. I don't bother doing that, but you can definitely use them to change the codes between every guest. And this is another important point. You definitely want to have code locks. You don't want to be meeting people with keys, because that's just a nightmare. I've never done that from the very beginning. But you will have people whose flight's delayed and they don't show up till 1, and you just don't want to deal with that. So I highly recommend getting code-enabled locks. The most bad horror experience for you in my STR. Honestly, I don't know if I've done a very good job at vetting people, or I've been very lucky. I really have not had anything bad happen specifically because I was doing STR. I did have one really bad bed bug infestation, but that could happen with an LTR. I had a washing machine flood my entire place, and I was shut down for 3 months. But again, that could have happened with an LTR.
Is the insurance, sorry, quick question there. When the washing machine flooded, did your insurance cover it? I mean, you do carry different insurance for an STR, running an STR, right?
That's a very good point. That is a very good point. So be very careful with the type of insurance that you're using for properties that you're doing short-term rental with. Because if you just have a regular policy and something happens and the company finds out you're doing short-term rentals, they will not cover you, even if it has nothing to do with the fact that you were doing short-term rentals. So I use a company called Proper Insurance. That's the gold standard of insurance in the short-term rental market. It's very expensive, but it gives you $2 million in liability coverage. It gives you income interruption insurance, and then along with the standard property insurance. If you don't want to go with Proper Insurance, again, that's the name of a company, Proper Insurance, you can tell companies like State Farm or Liberty Mutual. A lot of them have now added riders to their existing policies, but you have to keep after them in two senses. The first sense is, if you ask your agent and they tell you, yeah, it's covered, don't believe them. Get it in writing, because I guarantee you it's not covered under your regular policy. Under any circumstances, it will not be covered. And you don't want to find out the real answer after something horrible has happened. If they tell you, we will not insure that property, check on the web, just do a Google search and see, for example, State Farm. My State Farm agent, if I asked them, would say they don't insure short-term rentals. I know for a fact that they do. So you kind of have to keep after people to make sure that you get the right answers. But to answer your question, Kavitha, yes, I have specialized short-term rental insurance with Proper. It's backed by Lloyd's of London.
Okay, I think we are getting more questions as we get through them. So I will give you an option of bailing out at this point, or do you want to get through a few more questions?
Let me check the time.
Yeah, it's 8:54 Central. Or you can pick maybe two questions.
Let me look through.
Yeah.
Let me look through some
it just keeps. I feel like, oh, we got to the end, and then it's like some more.
That's fine. All right, let's see.
And I think there was a question about tax deduction, and I think that is probably more of a CPA question and not something we should comment on
Yeah,
technically.
yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
so I'm going to boot that one. Rishi, ask your CPA. We don't want to talk about taxes.
Okay, so here's a good question. Renee asked, what percentage do you think you save or percentage you spend by managing yourself versus having someone else do it? Property managers, first of all, take 25% of the revenues right off the top. And they also don't do it as well as I do it. They don't do the pricing as well as I do. And so me personally, well, let me just answer in general. If you can self-manage, you automatically, I think, double your profits, right? If you think that your net revenue is going to be 25% and you have a manager, by not having the manager, you've automatically doubled. So it's well worth exploring, and it's a huge payoff if you can do it yourself. Concerns or suggestions with having a pool? Yes. Massive concerns. Suggestion is talk to proper insurance. They will insure you against that risk. I have in two of my cabins, in one of my cabins, I have an indoor pool, and the other one I have an outdoor pool, and they just charge me extra, and it's covered. But if you definitely, if you have a pool, you definitely do not want to be doing this without this proper, I said proper, but without the correct type of insurance. Let's see. So here's a question I think is interesting about getting repeat renters to go direct. Have I been successful? The Airbnb and VRBO fees are crazy. It's funny. My company name is, as Kavitha mentioned initially, is SmokyStays. The first word in every one of my listings is SmokyStays. So it's SmokyStays 5-bedroom cabin, SmokyStays indoor pool cabin, SmokyStays whatever. And literally, people never figure out that all they have to do is go to SmokyStays.com. So I do have a website. I actually charge 7% more on my website versus the daily fees from Airbnb or VRBO, but I don't have their service fees. So I do encourage people to go direct. I do a lot of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram advertising. I don't do SEO. You're not going to beat VRBO and Airbnb and the large STR companies at SEO. I just don't think that's useful. But yes, I do try to get people to go direct, repeat or not. Initially, like, I mean, I'm just shocked at how few people figure out that they can just go to my website and they just pay the Airbnb service fees. But yeah, I agree, they're very high. So I think we've come to the last of the questions that I feel comfortable addressing. And I do have to drop off. I allocated an hour and a half for this, but yes. I really appreciate you having me. I'm happy to share my story and encourage people to do this. This is a very kind of lucrative, for me, life-changing thing. And it's a good source of returns for people, frankly, without, it's not passive, but relative to the income, it is passive. And, again, I would encourage people to join, and we'll send out a list of, these Facebook groups where you can talk to other people about their experiences, talk to them about their fears before starting and how they started and how they got going. And there are plenty of people that have done what I've done, where they started doing it with 1 or 2 units, doing it part-time, quickly grew to, they started managing other people's units, and eventually, they quit their jobs and they do this, full-time. Now those people typically scale, like they have like 50, 100, 150 units, and that is actually a lot of work and full-time work. But anyway, again,
thank you so much, Sandeep, for being here and sharing your story. I met Sandeep a few years ago and I was very inspired. So I'm excited and happy to bring him on the webinar. We've been talking about this for quite a while. So thank you for coming here and sharing this. And I hope it was useful for all of you guys who've been thinking about Airbnb but haven't taken any action. I wouldn't call it Airbnb, but short-term rentals. Please take action, and I hope you can put this to good use. Have a good night, everyone. And thank you for taking time away from your families to join me. I will see you in 2 weeks. Thanks.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Hi, I'm Kavitha Baratakke. I hope you found this video useful, and if you did, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you can get notified of any future videos I upload. I plan to cover a lot of investor education on this channel, and I hope you'll stay with me for it. If you have any feedback on future content you'd like to see me cover, please drop me a note or a comment on my video. Thank you for watching, and thank you for supporting me.